The rain came down so hard that evening, you could barely see 5 feet ahead. Maria was driving home from her cleaning job at the hotel, tired like always, but pushing through because that's what mothers do. Her son Diego sat in the back seat quiet, working on his math homework by the dim light of his phone. She'd taken this road 1,000 times before. Every curve, every bump, she knew them all. But tonight was different. Tonight the road was slick, and when that deer jumped out from nowhere, Maria's hands jerked the wheel too fast. The tires lost their grip. Everything happened in slow motion and lightning fast all at once. The car spun sideways, then slammed hard into a wooden fence post on the side of the road. The sound of metal crunching mixed with Diego's scream. Then silence. Terrible, heavy silence. Diego opened his eyes, his heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. His notebook had flown somewhere. His pencil was on the floor. But he was okay. He wasn't hurt. He called out for his mama, his voice shaking. Maria tried to answer, but all that came out was a gasp of pain. She couldn't move. Her legs were trapped under the dashboard, twisted in ways legs shouldn't twist. The pain was so sharp, so complete that she felt like she might pass out. But she couldn't. Not with Diego in the car. Not with her baby scared and alone. Diego unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward, trying to see his mother in the dark. The rain kept hammering on the roof. The windshield was cracked in a spider web pattern. His mama's face was pale, covered in sweat. That's when the headlights appeared through the rain. A truck slowed down, pulled over to the side. Diego watched as a tall man got out, wearing a worn ranch jacket and a cowboy hat that was quickly getting soaked. The man ran to their car, his boots splashing through puddles. He knocked on the window, his face pressed close to the glass. Diego could see the concern in his eyes, the way his mouth moved as he shouted to be heard over the storm. Diego managed to unlock the door. The man pulled it open and immediately looked at Maria, then at Diego. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that made you feel like maybe things would be okay. "I'm Thomas," he said. "I'm going to help you. You're going to be all right." He pulled out his phone and called for an ambulance, giving their location with the ease of someone who knew every back road in the county. Then he grabbed a flashlight from his truck and came back, kneeling in the rain beside Maria's door. Thomas talked to her, kept her conscious, told her to focus on his voice. He asked Diego questions too, keeping the boy calm, asking his name, his age, what grade he was in. Simple things that gave Diego something to focus on besides his mother's quiet whimpers of pain. The ambulance felt like it took forever, but Thomas stayed the whole time. He found an old blanket in his truck and tucked it around Diego in the back seat. He never stopped talking, never let the silence get too heavy. When the paramedics finally arrived, their red lights flashing through the rain, they had to work carefully to get Maria out. Thomas stood with Diego the whole time, one hand on the boy's shoulder. Diego watched them slide his mama onto a stretcher, watched her face twist in pain, watched her try to stay strong even though he could tell she wanted to cry. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Maria's eyes found her son. She tried to say something, but her voice was too weak. The paramedic said Diego could ride with her, and Thomas helped him climb into the ambulance. But before the doors closed, Maria grabbed the paramedic's arm. She managed to whisper something, and the paramedic looked at Thomas, then back at her. Thomas stepped closer. "Ma'am, we need to go," the paramedic said gently. Maria's eyes were desperate now, tears mixing with rain on her face. She looked at Thomas, this stranger who'd stopped in the storm. Her voice came out broken, scared. "My son," she whispered. "If something happens to me, my son has no one. We have no family here. No one." Thomas looked at Diego, saw the fear in the boy's eyes, saw how small he looked in that big ambulance. He saw a mother's terror at the thought of leaving her child alone in the world. And something in his chest, something that had been closed off for 5 long years, cracked open just a little. "I'll follow you to the hospital," Thomas said. "The boy won't be alone." As the ambulance doors closed and the siren wailed into the night, Thomas ran back to his truck. He sat there for just a moment, water dripping from his hat, his hands on the steering wheel. He thought about his own daughter, gone now. He thought about how life can change in one moment, one spin of the wheel, one patch of wet road. Then he started his truck and followed those red lights through the rain, having no idea that this night, this accident, this choice to stop and help would change his life forever. Sometimes that's how it happens. You're just driving home, and the universe puts someone in your path who needs you, and if you're paying attention, if your heart isn't completely closed, you stop. You help. You stay. Thomas followed those lights all the way to County General Hospital, and he didn't leave. Not that night. Not for a long time after, because sometimes being a father isn't about biology. Sometimes it's about showing up in the rain when someone has no one else. Sometimes it's about making a choice to care, even when the person is a stranger. And Thomas, whether he knew it yet or not, had just made that choice. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Diego sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, his feet dangling above the floor because he wasn't quite tall enough yet. His clothes were still damp from the rain. His hands were folded in his lap, and he stared at them like they might tell him what to do next. Around him, life kept moving. A television played the news in the corner, but nobody was watching. A woman coughed into her elbow. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. But Diego felt frozen, separate from all of it, like he was watching the world through thick glass. A police officer had talked to him earlier, asked him questions about the accident. A nurse had checked him over, shined a light in his eyes, asked if anything hurt. He'd shaken his head. Nothing hurt on the outside, but inside everything hurt. They'd taken his mama into surgery. That's all anyone would tell him. Surgery. That word kept repeating in his head, getting scarier each time. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to call. His mama's phone was somewhere in the wrecked car, and he didn't have anyone's number memorized except hers. His grandmother was back in Mexico, and they barely talked anymore. His father? Diego didn't even know where he was. Somewhere in California, maybe. Or maybe not. It had been 3 years since he left, and Diego had stopped wondering. Time moved strange in that waiting room. Sometimes it felt like hours passed in minutes. Other times, minutes stretched so long they felt like days. Diego counted the tiles on the floor. Then he counted them again. He was on his third count when he heard footsteps and looked up. It was Thomas, the man from the road. He'd gone to talk to the police to give his statement about what he saw. But he came back. Diego felt a small wave of relief that surprised him. At least there was one person here who knew what happened. One person who'd been there. Thomas sat down in the chair beside him, moving slow and careful like he didn't want to startle the boy. He still wore his wet jacket. His boots left small puddles on the clean floor. Any news? Thomas asked quietly. Diego shook his head. His throat felt tight, like if he tried to talk, he might start crying, and he didn't want to cry in front of this stranger. The doctors here are good, Thomas said. Best in the county. Your mama's in good hands. Diego nodded, but he didn't feel reassured. Good hands didn't mean everything would be okay. He'd watched enough TV to know that. They sat in silence for a while. Thomas didn't try to fill the quiet with empty words, and Diego was grateful for that. Some of the nurses kept telling him everything would be fine, speaking in those high, fake cheerful voices adults use when they're lying to kids. But Thomas just sat there, solid and real, not pretending to know things he didn't know. After a while, Thomas got up and came back with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the vending machine. He handed one to Diego. It wasn't very good, too watery and not sweet enough, but it was warm, and Diego held it with both hands, feeling the heat seep into his cold fingers. You got people you need to call? Thomas asked. Family somewhere? Diego shook his head again. Just us, he said quietly. Just me and my mama. Thomas didn't say anything to that, but something crossed his face. Understanding, maybe. Or sadness. Diego couldn't tell. The hours dragged on. Midnight came and went. A janitor mopped the floors. The shift changed and new nurses appeared at the desk. Thomas stayed the whole time. At some point, Diego's head got heavy, and he rested it against the arm of the chair, his eyes closing even though he tried to stay awake. When he woke up, there was a blanket over him that Thomas must have found somewhere, and pale morning light was coming through the windows. Thomas was still there, sitting in the same chair, though his eyes were red-rimmed and tired. A doctor finally appeared, still in his blue surgical scrubs, a mask hanging around his neck. He looked tired, too, the kind of tired that comes from hours of difficult work. Thomas stood up and Diego jumped to his feet, his heart hammering. Are you Maria Rodriguez's family? The doctor asked, looking between them. I'm her son, Diego said quickly. The doctor's eyes softened. He crouched down a little so he was closer to Diego's height. Your mom is out of surgery. She's going to live, but I need to be honest with you about her injuries. Diego felt Thomas's hand rest gently on his shoulder. He was glad for it because his legs suddenly felt weak. The doctor explained it in simple words, but Diego understood the important parts. Both of his mama's legs were badly broken. Multiple fractures, he said. The bones had been crushed. They'd put metal rods and pins in to hold everything together. There was nerve damage, too. She'd need more surgeries later. Months of physical therapy. Maybe a year or more before she could walk normally again. If she could walk normally again, can I see her? Diego asked, his voice small. She's in recovery right now, still asleep from the anesthesia. Give it a few hours. We'll let you know when she's awake. The doctor stood up and looked at Thomas. Are you the father? No, Thomas said. I'm just a friend. I was at the accident scene. The doctor nodded slowly, then looked back at Diego with concern. Is there someone we can call for you? A relative who can stay with you? Diego felt panic rising in his chest. I want to stay with my mama. Of course you can visit, the doctor said gently. But you can't stay overnight in the ICU. Hospital policy. We need to contact a guardian, someone who can take care of you while your mother recovers. There's no one, Diego said, his voice breaking. I told you, it's just us. The doctor's expression grew more worried. He glanced at Thomas again, then pulled out his phone. I need to call social services. They'll help figure out the arrangements. Diego knew what that meant. He'd heard about social services at school, heard whispered stories about kids getting taken away. No, he said, backing up. I'm staying with my mama. I don't need anyone. Son, your mama's going to be in the hospital for a long time, the doctor said. You need somewhere safe to stay, someone to look after you, get you to school. Thomas felt something turn over in his chest. He looked at this scared boy, alone in the world except for a mother who couldn't walk. He thought about his own empty house, the silence that greeted him every night. He thought about his daughter's room, still exactly as she'd left it 5 years ago, a shrine to a life cut short. Before he really thought it through, before he could talk himself out of it, Thomas heard himself say, He can stay with me. Everyone looked at him. Diego's eyes went wide. The doctor frowned. With all due respect, sir, we don't know you. We can't just release a child to a stranger. I understand that, Thomas said, but I'm offering. I have a ranch about 20 minutes from here. Plenty of space. The boy can visit his mother every day. I'll make sure he gets to school. Whatever needs doing, I'll do it. The doctor looked uncertain. That's very kind, but social services will need to be involved. There are procedures, background checks, home visits. That's fine, Thomas said. Do whatever you need to do. I'm just saying there's an option here that doesn't involve this boy going to some facility where he doesn't know anybody. Diego stared at Thomas, trying to understand why this stranger would do this. Adults always had reasons for things, and those reasons weren't always good. But Thomas's face didn't look like the face of someone with bad intentions. He just looked sad and determined, like he'd made up his mind about something important. I need to talk to my mama first, Diego said firmly. Before anything happens, I need to talk to her. The doctor nodded. That's fair. Let's take this one step at a time. I'll have someone from social services come down to talk to everyone. In the meantime, Diego, let's get you some breakfast. And sir, he looked at Thomas. Thank you for staying with him. Not many people would do that. As the doctor walked away, Diego looked up at Thomas. Why? He asked simply. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Because 5 years ago my daughter was in a hospital bed after a car accident and she didn't make it. And my wife died too. And I stood in a hallway like this one and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save them. I couldn't help them. I couldn't stop it from happening. He paused, his voice rough. But maybe I can help now. Maybe that's why I was on that road last night. Diego didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure he really understood. But he saw the pain in Thomas's eyes. The same kind of pain he felt in his own chest when he thought about his father leaving. About his mama's broken legs. About how scared he was. Okay, Diego whispered. And in that moment something began. Something neither of them expected. Something that would grow slowly, carefully like a seed planted in hard ground. Not sure if it would take root, but trying anyway. Because sometimes families don't start with love. Sometimes they start with loss, with fear. With a stranger's hand on your shoulder when you have no one else in the world. And somehow, impossibly, that can be enough. When Maria finally woke up, the world felt fuzzy and distant. The pain medication made everything soft around the edges, but not soft enough to hide the sharp ache in her legs. She tried to move them and couldn't. Panic shot through her before she remembered. The accident, the rain, the deer, her car spinning out of control. Diego. Where was Diego? She tried to sit up and a nurse appeared beside her, gentle hands pressing her back down. Easy now. You just had surgery. Your son is fine. He's right outside with someone. Who? Maria's voice came out raspy, her throat dry from the breathing tube they'd had down it during surgery. A man named Thomas. He's been here all night with your boy. Maria's mind struggled to place the name. Then she remembered. The rancher. The man who'd stopped in the rain. She'd only seen him for a minute before the ambulance took her away. Why was he still here? Over the next few days, as Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, fighting through the pain and the medications and the fog in her head, one thing stayed constant. Every time she opened her eyes, either Diego was there or Thomas was. Sometimes both. Thomas would sit in the corner of the room, quiet and unobtrusive, reading a farming magazine or checking his phone while Diego did homework or held his mother's hand. When Maria was awake enough to talk, Thomas would step out to give them privacy. When she slept, he stayed to keep Diego company. On the fourth day, when Maria's head was finally clear enough to really understand what had happened to her, the social worker came. Her name was Patricia, and she had kind eyes but a serious face. She pulled up a chair beside Maria's bed and explained the situation. Your injuries are extensive. You're looking at 2 more surgeries, months of physical therapy. You won't be able to work for at least 6 months, maybe longer. You'll need help with basic tasks like bathing, getting dressed, moving around. Maria closed her eyes. She'd known it was bad, but hearing it laid out like this made it real in a way it hadn't been before. And Diego needs somewhere to stay, Patricia continued. We have excellent foster families in the county. We'll make sure he's placed somewhere close so he can visit regularly. No. The word came out sharp, definite. Maria's eyes snapped open. No foster care. I won't allow it. Patricia's expression stayed patient. I understand this is difficult, but what's the alternative? You don't have family in the area. You're going to be hospitalized for weeks, then you'll need intensive care yourself. You can't take care of a child right now. Then I'll figure something out, Maria said, her voice rising despite the pain it caused. I'll call someone. My mother in Mexico, maybe she can come. Or I'll leave the hospital early, I'll manage. But my son is not going into the system. She'd heard too many stories. Kids getting separated from their parents, bounced from home to home, getting lost in paperwork. No, not her Diego. She'd been taking care of him alone for 3 years since his father left. She'd worked 2 jobs, kept food on the table, kept him safe. She wasn't going to lose him now. That's when Thomas knocked lightly on the doorframe. He'd heard the raised voices from outside. Sorry to interrupt, he said. But I wanted to talk to you about Diego, if that's all right. Maria looked at this stranger, this tall, weathered man with the sad eyes who'd been haunting her hospital room like a guardian ghost. Who are you? She asked, not unkindly, but needing to know. Why are you still here? Thomas stepped into the room, holding his hat in his hands. My name is Thomas McAllister. I own a cattle ranch about 20 minutes from here. I was the one who found you and your boy on the road that night. I remember, Maria said, and I'm grateful, but that doesn't explain why you're still here 4 days later. Thomas looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't used to explaining himself. I heard Diego tell the police he didn't have any family, and I made him a promise that he wouldn't be alone. I keep my promises. Patricia watched this exchange with professional interest. Mr. McAllister has offered to provide temporary care for Diego while you recover. Absolutely not, Maria said immediately. I don't know you. You could be anyone. You could be dangerous. I understand that, Thomas said calmly. If I were you, I'd think the same thing. But I'm not dangerous. I've already been through a background check with social services. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Patricia here has been to my ranch, looked at the property, the guest room where Diego would stay. She's talked to my neighbors, my pastor, people who've known me my whole life. It's true, Patricia said. I've done my due diligence. Mr. McAllister checks out. He's respected in the community. And more importantly, Diego seems comfortable with him. Maria felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. This is crazy. People don't just take in strangers' children. There's always a reason. Always something they want. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 5 years ago I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident. Drunk driver hit them head-on Highway 40. My little girl was 8 years old, same age as your Diego. The room went very still. Since then I've been living in a house with 4 bedrooms and nobody in them but me, working a ranch that used to be full of laughter and life, and now it's just quiet all the time. I'm not trying to replace my daughter. I know that's impossible. But maybe I can help a boy who needs someone right now. Maybe that's worth something. Maria studied his face, looking for lies, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was too good to be true. Because in her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But all she saw in Thomas's face was grief and sincerity. Still, she shook her head. I can't just give my son to a stranger. Then don't, Thomas said. Don't decide right now. Let me prove myself first. Patricia can set up supervised visits. Diego can come to the ranch for a few hours, see the place, see if he likes it. You can talk to him about it. If at any point you or he feels uncomfortable, we stop. No questions asked. Over the next week, that's exactly what happened. Diego visited Thomas's ranch for the first time and came back with his eyes wide, talking about horses and cattle and a dog named Rusty. The next visit lasted longer. Patricia went with them, watched Thomas show Diego how to feed the chickens, how to collect eggs, how to brush down a horse. Maria watched her son come alive in ways she hadn't seen in years. Working 2 jobs, she'd barely had time to spend with him. He'd been alone a lot in their small apartment watching TV or playing on his phone. But at the ranch he was active, engaged, learning things. And Thomas was patient with him, never pushy, never demanding, just steady and present. But it was the conversation she had with Diego that finally changed her mind. Mama, he said one evening, holding her hand. I know you don't like this. I know it feels wrong to you. But Mr. Thomas, he's good. He doesn't try to be my dad or anything. He just helps me with homework and makes sure I eat vegetables and lets me help with the animals. And Mama, he said, I can visit you every single day, he promised. Baby, you don't have to do this to make me feel better, Maria said, tears sliding down her face. We can figure something else out. But I want to, Diego said. Foster care sounds scary, but the ranch feels safe. And maybe, just for a little while, until you're better, maybe it's okay to let someone help us. That night, after Diego left with Patricia, Maria cried harder than she'd cried since the accident. She cried for her broken body, for her broken life, for the fact that she couldn't take care of her own son. She cried because accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like she'd failed as a mother. But she also knew Diego was right. Sometimes you have to let people help you, even when it tears your pride to shreds. The next day, when Thomas came to visit, Maria looked him in the eye and said, Every other day, you bring him to see me every other day. And if I hear even one thing that concerns me, one single thing, I will fight you in court with everything I have. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Thomas said. You have my word. And this is temporary, Maria added, her voice shaking. When I get better, when I can work again, he comes home to me. Of course, Thomas agreed. I wouldn't have it any other way. Maria looked at her son, who stood between them, looking smaller than his 8 years, carrying more weight than any child should have to carry. You're sure about this, mijo? Diego nodded. I'm sure, Mama. Maria reached out her hand and Diego took it. Then, after a moment, she reached out her other hand to Thomas. He looked surprised, but took it gently. Thank you, Maria whispered. I don't understand why you're doing this, but thank you. Thomas nodded, unable to speak around the sudden lump in his throat. And so, an arrangement was made. Not a normal one. Not one that made sense to most people, but one born out of necessity and tragedy and maybe, just maybe, something like grace, the kind that shows up on rainy roads when you least expect it, in the form of a grieving rancher who can't save his own family, but might be able to help save yours. Sometimes that's how life works. The help we need doesn't come in the package we expected. But if we're desperate enough, if we're brave enough, we take it anyway. We trust strangers. We let people in. We accept that maybe, just this once, the universe has sent someone good our way. Maria signed the temporary guardianship papers 2 days later, her hand shaking the whole time. And Diego packed his small bag of belongings, ready to start a chapter of his life he never could have imagined. The first thing Diego noticed when they drove up the long gravel driveway was how much space there was. Just space everywhere, rolling hills and open sky and land that seemed to go on forever. He'd lived his whole life in small apartments, places where you could hear the neighbors through the walls, where you had to keep your voice down after 9 o'clock. Here, you could probably shout and nobody would hear you except the cows. Thomas's truck crunched to a stop in front of a big white farmhouse that looked like something from an old movie. It had a wraparound porch with rocking chairs and hanging baskets with flowers that needed watering. Paint was peeling a bit around the window frames. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, real, the kind of house that had stood for 100 years and would probably stand for 100 more. Well, Thomas said, turning off the engine. This is it. Home. Diego climbed out of the truck, his backpack over his shoulder, everything he'd brought with him fitting into that one bag. Thomas grabbed a box of groceries from the back, things he'd stopped to buy on the way, and led Diego up the porch steps. A big golden retriever came bounding around the corner of the house, tail wagging so hard his whole back end moved with it. Diego stepped back, a little nervous. That's just Rusty, Thomas said. He's friendly. Too friendly, probably. Can't guard worth a darn because he thinks everyone's his best friend. Rusty pushed his nose into Diego's hand, and despite everything, despite the strangeness of this day and this place, Diego smiled a little. He'd always wanted a dog. Inside, the house was clean but worn. Comfortable furniture that had seen better days. Family photos on the walls that Thomas quickly walked past without looking at. A kitchen with a big wooden table that could seat 8 people easy. Diego wondered if it ever did anymore. Thomas led him upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hall. It was simple. A bed with a blue quilt, a desk by the window, an empty bookshelf waiting to be filled. The walls were bare, painted a plain white. Thought you might want to put up some posters or something, Thomas said, setting Diego's bag on the bed. Make it feel more like yours. Diego nodded, but didn't say anything. He didn't have any posters. He didn't have much of anything except what was in that bag. Bathrooms across the hall, Thomas continued. My room's downstairs, so you've got your privacy up here. If you need anything in the night, just holler. I'm a light sleeper. Okay, Diego said quietly. An awkward silence filled the room. Thomas cleared his throat. Well, I'll let you get settled. Come down when you're ready and I'll show you around outside. After Thomas left, Diego sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room that was supposed to be his now, at least for a while. It was bigger than his room at home. Quieter, too, so quiet he could hear a clock ticking somewhere downstairs. He pulled out his phone, thought about calling his mama, but she was probably sleeping. The pain medication knocked her out most of the time. Instead, he just sat there trying not to cry, trying to be brave like his mama needed him to be. Those first few days were strange. Thomas kept things simple, showed Diego the routine. Up at 6 in the morning because animals don't care if it's a weekend. Feed the chickens, collect eggs, check on the cattle. Breakfast after. Usually something basic like scrambled eggs and toast because Thomas wasn't much of a cook. Then Diego would do his homework at the kitchen table while Thomas worked on paperwork or fixed things around the property. They didn't talk much. Diego was too shy, too uncertain, and Thomas seemed like a man who'd gotten used to silence, who didn't waste words just to fill the air. But it wasn't a bad silence. It was just quiet, like the house itself, like the land around them. Every other day, true to his promise, Thomas drove Diego to the hospital to see his mama. Those visits were the hardest part. Seeing her in that bed, seeing the pain she tried to hide, seeing how weak she'd gotten. But Diego never complained. He held her hand. told her about the ranch, about the chickens and Rusty and how big the sky was at night. Maria would smile, but Diego could see the sadness in her eyes. The worry, the fear that she was losing him somehow, that every day he spent on that ranch was a day further from her. After a couple weeks, Diego started to relax a little. Thomas taught him how to brush down the horses, how to check their hooves for stones, how to move slow and steady around them so he wouldn't spook them. There was a mare named Daisy who was gentle, and Thomas let Diego feed her apple slices from his palm. "Keep your hand flat," Thomas instructed. "Like that. Good." Diego felt Daisy's soft lips take the apple piece, felt her warm breath on his hand, and something in his chest loosened a little. This was nice. Different from anything he'd known before, but nice. School was harder. Thomas enrolled him in the local elementary school, and Diego was the new kid, which was never easy. Kids asked where he came from, why he was living with old Mr. McAllister, where his parents were. Diego didn't know how to explain, so he mostly kept to himself, ate lunch alone, didn't make friends. Thomas noticed. He didn't push, but he noticed. One evening, about 3 weeks in, Diego was doing homework at the kitchen table, working on a math problem he couldn't figure out. He'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, getting more and more frustrated, when Thomas sat down across from him. "Need help?" Thomas asked. Diego wanted to say no, wanted to figure it out himself, but the truth was he did need help. His mama had always helped him with homework, but she'd been working so much she was usually too tired. And now she wasn't here at all. "I don't get fractions," Diego admitted quietly. Thomas pulled the paper toward him, studied the problem. Then he got up and came back with an apple and a knife. He cut the apple into slices. "See? If this is a whole apple and I cut it into 4 pieces, each piece is 1/4 of the apple, right?" Diego nodded. "So if you eat 2 pieces, you've eaten 2/4, which is the same as 1/2. Make sense?" Something clicked in Diego's brain. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, I think I get it." They worked through the problems together, Thomas patient and clear, never making Diego feel stupid for not understanding. When they finished, Thomas put the apple slices on a plate between them, and they ate them together, crunchy and sweet. "You did good," Thomas said. "You're a smart kid." Diego felt something warm spread through his chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had told him he was smart. As the weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks, life started to develop a rhythm. Diego learned the routine of the ranch, started to take ownership of some of the chores without being asked. He'd get up and feed the chickens before breakfast. He'd help Thomas haul hay to the cattle, his small hands working alongside Thomas's rough, calloused ones. Thomas taught him practical things. How to hammer a nail straight, how to read a weather forecast, how to tell when a cow was about to calve. Diego soaked it all up, hungry for this kind of attention, this kind of teaching. His father had never taught him anything. His mother had tried, but she'd been so busy just surviving. Still, Diego kept his distance emotionally. He called Thomas Mr. Thomas, never just Thomas, and definitely not anything like what you'd call a father. He was polite, respectful, helpful, but he kept a wall up, protecting himself from getting too attached to something that was temporary, because that's what this was. Temporary. His mama was getting better. Eventually, she'd walk again. Eventually, they'd go back to their real life, just the two of them, like it had always been. At night, alone in his room, Diego would lie awake and listen to the sounds of the ranch. Cows lowing in the distance, wind moving through the trees, an owl hooting. Such different sounds from the city, from the sirens and traffic and shouting neighbors he was used to. Sometimes he'd cry quietly into his pillow, missing his mama, missing his old life even though it hadn't been much. But mostly he'd just listen, finding a strange comfort in the sounds of this place that wasn't home but was starting to feel like something close to it. Downstairs, Thomas would sit in his living room, looking at the photo of his wife and daughter on the mantel, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he was helping this boy or just using him to fill the hole in his own life, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake or if maybe, just maybe, this was what he was supposed to do. The house didn't feel quite so empty with footsteps upstairs. The kitchen table didn't feel so lonely with 2 plates on it instead of 1. And Rusty had someone to play with again, someone to throw the ball for him in the evening before dinner. Neither of them talked about it, but both of them felt it. This thing growing between them, careful and slow, Like a plant that's not sure if it's safe to bloom yet. Not love, not yet, but maybe trust. Maybe the beginning of understanding. Maybe the start of something that could, if they were both brave enough, become what they both needed. But Diego kept his wall up, and Thomas respected it. They worked side by side, day after day, two people sharing space and time and the work of living, waiting to see what would happen next, both scared to hope for too much. It was the school notice that started everything. Diego brought it home on a Tuesday afternoon, a bright yellow paper announcing the annual Father-Son Workshop Day. Students and their dads were invited to spend a Saturday at school building birdhouses together, playing basketball, having lunch. Diego had crumpled the paper and shoved it to the bottom of his backpack. But his teacher, Mrs. Chen, called that evening. Thomas answered the phone in the kitchen while Diego was upstairs supposedly doing homework. "Mr. McAllister, I wanted to reach out about the father-son event next month," she said.
Diego seemed upset when I handed out the permission slips today.
"I know his situation is unique, but I thought perhaps you might be willing to attend with him. Several students bring uncles or grandfathers. It's really about spending time together, building something." Thomas thanked her and said he'd think about it. When he hung up, he stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. He'd noticed Diego had been quiet at dinner, pushing his food around his plate. Now he understood why. He didn't bring it up that night, or the next day. He wanted to give Diego space to come to him if he wanted to talk about it. But Diego didn't talk about it. He just got quieter, more withdrawn, retreating back into that shell he'd been slowly coming out of. A week went by, then another. The permission slip deadline approached. Thomas found the crumpled yellow paper when he was doing laundry, pulled it from Diego's jeans pocket. He smoothed it out, read it, and his heart hurt for this boy who'd lost so much already. That Friday evening, Thomas tried to bring it up gently. They were cleaning up after dinner, Diego washing dishes while Thomas dried. "So your teacher called a while back," Thomas said carefully, "about some kind of school event." Diego's hand stopped moving. He stared down at the soapy water. "I'm not going," he said flatly. "That's okay," Thomas said. "But if you wanted to go, I'd be happy to take you. No pressure, just if you wanted to." "I said I'm not going." Diego's voice was harder now, defensive. Thomas knew when to back off. "All right then," he said quietly, and they finished the dishes in silence. But that night, Diego didn't come down for their usual evening routine. Usually they'd watch some TV together, or Diego would read while Thomas looked over ranch accounts. It wasn't much, but it was their time. Tonight, Diego stayed upstairs. Around 9, Thomas went up to check on him. He knocked softly on the door. No answer. He knocked again. "Diego? You okay in there?" "Go away!" The voice was choked, thick with tears. Thomas stood there, his hand on the doorknob, torn between respecting the boy's privacy and knowing that sometimes kids need someone even when they say they don't. "I'm coming in," he said gently, and opened the door. Diego was sitting on his bed, curled up with his knees to his chest, face buried in his arms. His shoulders were shaking. He was crying hard, the kind of crying you try to hide but can't. Thomas's first instinct was to leave, to give him space. But then he thought about his own daughter, how she used to cry like this sometimes and how she always felt better when someone just sat with her. So he walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance but making his presence known. "You want to talk about it?" Thomas asked quietly. "No," Diego sobbed. "Just leave me alone." "I can do that if you really want me to," Thomas said. "But sometimes it helps to let it out. Whatever's hurting you." For a long time, Diego didn't say anything. He just cried, and Thomas just sat there, patient and still. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the room in orange and gold light. A dove cooed somewhere near the window. Finally, Diego's voice came out broken and small. "She's never going to walk again." Thomas's breath caught. "Your mama? Did the doctors say something?" "I heard the nurse talking," Diego said, his face still buried in his arms. "When I was visiting yesterday, she didn't know I was in the hallway. She said Mama's legs aren't healing right, that she might need surgery again, that even with therapy, she might always need a walker or a cane, maybe even a wheelchair." "Diego, that's not, and it's my fault." Diego's head snapped up, his face red and wet with tears. "If I hadn't asked her to take me to get that stupid book from the library that night, if we'd just stayed home, if I hadn't distracted her by talking in the car, maybe she would have seen the deer sooner. Maybe she could have stopped in time. Thomas felt like someone had punched him in the chest. This boy had been carrying this guilt for 2 months, letting it eat him alive inside. Diego. No, Thomas said firmly. No, son, listen to me. That accident was not your fault. It was dark. It was raining. A deer jumped out. That's nobody's fault. That's just what happened. But I needed that book, Diego insisted, his voice breaking again. For school. And she was tired. She'd worked all day and I made her go out again. I should have just said it was okay, I'd get the book later. But I didn't. I never thought about how tired she was. I only thought about what I wanted. The boy dissolved into tears again, and this time Thomas didn't hesitate. He pulled Diego into a hug, let the boy cry into his shoulder, and held him tight while he fell apart. Listen to me, Thomas said when the sobs quieted a little. You're 8 years old. You're a kid. You're supposed to ask for things. You're supposed to need stuff. That's not selfish, that's normal. Your mama was doing her job, taking care of you. She didn't do it because she had to. She did it because she loves you. And what happened after that was an accident. Accidents don't care about should-haves and could-haves. They just happen. But now everything's ruined, Diego whispered. Everything's different. We lost our apartment because she can't pay rent. Her job is gone, and I'm here instead of with her. And I feel guilty every time I'm happy about anything. Like when I'm feeding the horses or playing with Rusty or when you help me with homework. I feel guilty for not being sadder. For not being with her every minute. Thomas closed his eyes, holding this broken boy, wishing he knew the right words to say, wishing he could fix this. But some things couldn't be fixed with words. Your mama wants you to be happy, Thomas said. That's what every parent wants for their kid. She doesn't want you carrying this guilt around. And she doesn't want you to stop living your life because hers got hard for a while. What if she never gets better? Diego asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at him. What if she needs help forever? Who's going to take care of her? Where are we going to live? How are we going to survive? I don't know, Thomas said honestly. I don't have those answers. But I know this, you're not alone anymore. You've got me. And I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, whatever you and your mama need, I'm going to be here. Diego pulled back, looking up at Thomas with red, swollen eyes. Why? Why do you care so much? We're nobody to you. Just people you found on the side of the road. Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer that. Then he said, 5 years ago, when my wife and daughter died, I wanted to die too. Not in the way where I'd do anything about it, but just in the way where I stopped caring about anything. I stopped seeing the point. This ranch, this house, it all felt empty, like I was just going through the motions, waiting for my life to be over. He paused, his voice getting rougher. But then there you were on that rainy night, scared and alone. And your mama, hurt and desperate, with nobody to help her. And I thought maybe this is why I'm still here. Maybe I couldn't save my family, but maybe I can help save yours. Maybe that's my purpose now. Maybe you're the reason I didn't give up 5 years ago, even though I wanted to. Diego stared at him, trying to understand. You really mean that? I really mean that, Thomas said. You and your mama, you've given me something to care about again. Something to get up for in the morning besides just feeding cattle. You've made this house feel less empty. So when you ask why I care, that's why. Because you matter. To me, you matter. Fresh tears spilled down Diego's face, but they were different now. Not tears of guilt or fear, but something else. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just the simple comfort of knowing someone cared. I'm sorry I yelled at you, Diego whispered. You've got nothing to apologize for, Thomas said. You're allowed to have bad days. You're allowed to be angry and sad and scared. You don't have to be brave all the time. They sat together in the growing darkness, neither of them moving to turn on a light. Just sitting there in the quiet of that room in this house that was slowly becoming a home to both of them. After a while, Diego said, Mr. Thomas? Yeah? Would you really come to that father-son thing with me? If I wanted to go? Thomas felt his throat tighten. I'd be honored to. I'm not saying you're my dad, Diego said quickly. You're not. I just don't want to be the only kid who doesn't go. I understand, Thomas said, and that's fine. We'll go. We'll build a birdhouse, we'll eat some bad cafeteria food, and that'll be it. No pressure, no expectations. Diego nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Okay, then I'll go. Later that night, after Diego had finally fallen asleep, Thomas went downstairs and stood in front of the photo on the mantel. His wife smiled out at him from the frame, holding their daughter, both of them frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it had happened 100 years ago. I don't know what I'm doing, he whispered to the photo, but I'm trying. I'm really trying. 3 months after the accident, Maria took her first steps. They weren't real steps, not like before. They were shuffling half movements between parallel bars in the physical therapy room. Her face twisted in pain, sweat dripping down her temples, every muscle in her body shaking with the effort. But her feet moved. She took 4 steps before her legs gave out and the therapist caught her. Diego was there that day, watching through the observation window with Thomas beside him. When he saw his mama take those steps, he pressed his hands against the glass, his eyes wide. "She's doing it," he breathed. "She's really doing it." Thomas put a hand on his shoulder, his own throat tight with emotion. "She's strong, your mama. Strongest person I've ever seen." And it was true. Maria attacked her recovery with a fierce determination that amazed everyone at the rehabilitation center. She did every exercise the therapist gave her, pushed through pain that would have made most people quit, refused to accept that her legs might never work properly again. She'd been told she might need a wheelchair. She'd decided that wasn't acceptable, but the journey was brutal. Each small victory, 4 steps between bars, then 6, then 10, came at a massive cost. The pain was constant. Some days were better than others. Some days she'd make progress. Other days she'd try to stand and her legs would simply refuse and she'd end up back in the wheelchair, crying tears of frustration. The medical bills were another mountain to climb. Even with the hospital's financial assistance program, the costs were staggering. Multiple surgeries, weeks in intensive care, months of physical therapy, medications, medical equipment. The numbers kept growing, becoming more impossible. Maria had lost her job at the hotel. They'd been sympathetic, but they needed someone who could actually work. Not someone who might be able to work in 6 months, maybe. Her landlord had been less sympathetic. 2 months of unpaid rent, and he'd rented their apartment to someone else, boxing up her and Diego's belongings and putting them in storage. Everything she'd built, the small, modest life she'd created for herself and her son, had collapsed. And every day she lay in that hospital bed or sat in that therapy room, she felt the weight of her failure crushing her. The worst part was watching Diego change. Every time he visited, she saw more of Thomas in him. The way he stood a little straighter now. The way he talked about the ranch, about the animals, about things Thomas had taught him. The way he'd grown comfortable with this temporary situation that was supposed to be so temporary, but was stretching into months. One evening, Diego came bounding into her room with excitement she hadn't seen in a long time. "Mama, guess what? I got an A on my science project. Mr. Thomas helped me build a model of the solar system using different-sized balls and paint, and Mrs. Chen said it was one of the best in the class." Maria smiled, but inside her heart was breaking. She should have been the one helping him with that project. She should have been there for that moment of pride. "That's wonderful, mijo," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm so proud of you. And Mama Daisy, that's the horse I told you about? She let me ride her today. Mr. Thomas says I'm a natural. He's going to teach me how to properly saddle her next week." Every word was a small knife, not because she begrudged her son's happiness, but because she wasn't the one creating it. Thomas was. This man she barely knew, who'd appeared out of nowhere, was becoming the person Diego relied on, the person Diego learned from, the person who made Diego smile. After Diego left that evening, Thomas lingered behind as he usually did. Maria had noticed he always found some excuse to stay for a few minutes after Diego went to wait in the truck. "He's doing real well in school," Thomas said, pulling up a chair. "Teacher says his math scores have improved a lot." "That's good," Maria said flatly. Thomas studied her face. "You seem upset." "I'm fine, Maria." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've been bringing your son to see you for 3 months now. I've gotten pretty good at reading when something's wrong." She looked away, tears burning her eyes. "I'm his mother. I'm supposed to be the one teaching him things. I'm supposed to be the one he comes home to. Instead, he comes home to you. To your ranch. To your life. And I'm just this person he visits twice a week out of obligation." "That's not true," Thomas said. "He loves you. He talks about you all the time. He talks about you too." Maria shot back. "Mr. Thomas this, Mr. Thomas that. You're becoming his whole world, and I'm just this broken person in a hospital bed who can't give him anything." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You give him everything. You gave him life. You raised him alone for 8 years. You worked yourself to exhaustion to keep a roof over his head and food on the table. You're the reason he's a good kid, Maria. I'm just the person keeping him safe while you get better. What if I don't get better? The question came out in a whisper. What if this is as good as it gets? What if I'm always like this, always needing help, always broken? Then we'll figure it out, Thomas said simply. We? Maria's voice rose. There is no we, Thomas. This was supposed to be temporary. A few months, you said. Until I could work again, you said. But it's been 3 months and I still can't stand without help. I can't work. I can't even take care of myself, let alone my son. When does this end? When do you get to have your life back? Thomas looked at her steadily. I get a say in that too, don't I? What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe I don't want my old life back, Thomas said. Maybe having Diego around has been good for me. Maybe this arrangement is working for everyone. Don't, Maria said, shaking her head. Don't pretend this is some kind of blessing for you. I know what this really is. You're a good person who stopped to help, and now you're stuck with someone else's kid and someone else's problems, and you're too decent to walk away. But don't act like you want this. You're wrong, Thomas said quietly. I do want this. My house hasn't felt like a home in 5 years. Having Diego there, having someone to cook breakfast for, someone to teach things to, someone who needs me, that's given me purpose again. That's made me want to wake up in the morning. Maria closed her eyes, more tears sliding down her face. I don't know how to accept this. I don't know how to be okay with someone else raising my son. I'm not raising him, Thomas said. You're still his mother. Nothing changes that. I'm just helping. That's all this is, helping. But what if he forgets me? Maria's voice broke. What if he gets so used to life on the ranch that when I finally get out of here, he doesn't want to come back to me? Thomas reached over and took her hand, something he'd never done before. Maria, look at me. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. That boy loves you more than anything in this world, Thomas said. Every decision he makes, every good grade he gets, every new thing he learns, he does it because he wants to make you proud. He's not forgetting you. He's not replacing you. He's just surviving the best way he knows how while you get strong again. I'm so tired, Maria whispered. I'm so tired of being in pain. I'm so tired of failing at everything. I'm so tired of watching my life fall apart and not being able to stop it. I know, Thomas said, but you're not failing. You're fighting. There's a difference. Over the next few months, a strange thing happened. Maria and Thomas started to talk more during those few minutes after Diego left. At first, it was just about Diego, about school, about his behavior, about coordinating his care. But slowly, they started talking about other things. Maria told him about coming to America when she was 19, about working 3 jobs to send money back to her mother, about meeting Diego's father and believing his promises that he'd take care of them, about the betrayal when he left, about the shame of being alone with a 5-year-old and no support system. Thomas told her about his wife, about their daughter, about the drunk driver who'd taken them both in one terrible moment, about the guilt he carried, about how he'd been working late that night and his wife had to pick up their daughter from soccer practice alone, about how he'd blamed himself for years, convinced that if he'd just left work earlier, if he'd been the one driving, somehow he could have prevented it. They both carried guilt. They both carried grief, and somehow sharing it made it lighter. One day, Maria's physical therapist pulled Thomas aside in the hallway. Her name was Linda, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been working with Maria from the beginning. I need to talk to you about Maria's bills, Linda said. The hospital administration is getting concerned. The amount she owes is over $200,000 now. They're talking about sending her case to collections. Thomas's jaw tightened. What does that mean for her care? It means they might discharge her sooner than we'd like. Before she's really ready. They'll set her up with outpatient therapy, but it won't be the same as what she's getting here. How much longer does she need? Thomas asked. At least 3 more months of intensive therapy. Maybe 4. She's making progress, but it's slow. If we cut her loose too early, she might never fully recover. That evening, Thomas sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot for a long time, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. 2 weeks later, the hospital called Maria into a meeting. She wheeled herself into the administrator's office, her heart pounding, expecting the worst. 6 months after the accident, Maria walked out of the rehabilitation center on her own 2 feet. She used a walker, and her steps were slow and careful, but she walked. Diego cried when he saw her, running to hug her, and Thomas stood back, giving them their moment, his own eyes suspiciously bright. It should have been a purely happy day. But life has a way of complicating moments that should be simple. The letter arrived the next morning. Thomas found it in his mailbox return address from a law office in Dallas. Inside was a notice that made his blood run cold. A woman named Jennifer Clayton, claiming to be Thomas's second cousin, was petitioning for custody of Diego. The letter said she'd heard about the situation through family gossip, that it was inappropriate for a child to be living with a single man with no blood relation, that she and her husband had a proper family home with 2 children and were much better suited to raise Diego. Thomas read the letter 3 times, each time his anger growing. He'd never even met Jennifer Clayton, didn't remember any cousin by that name. But according to the letter, she'd done her research. She knew about Thomas's bank accounts, his property value, his investments, and reading between the lines, Thomas understood what this really was. She wanted money. Maybe she thought if she got custody, she could sue Thomas for support. Or maybe she figured a rancher with no kids would be generous with his distant relatives. Whatever her reasoning, it had nothing to do with Diego's well-being. But the law was tricky. Blood relatives had rights, even distant ones, and Thomas, for all his good intentions, was technically just a temporary guardian. His arrangement with Maria had been informal, handled quickly through emergency social services. It hadn't been meant to last 6 months. Thomas called his lawyer immediately. The news wasn't good. She has grounds for a custody hearing, his lawyer explained. Texas law favors blood relatives. If she can prove she has a stable home and resources, and if she argues that the current arrangement is inappropriate, a judge might side with her. But Diego doesn't even know her, Thomas protested. She's a complete stranger to him. Unfortunately, that may not matter legally. The court will look at what's in the child's best interest from their perspective. A married couple with children, in a traditional family setting versus a single man with no legal relationship to the child. On paper, her case looks strong. Thomas felt sick. What can we do? You need to formalize your guardianship. And Maria needs to be involved in this decision. She's still Diego's mother, still has parental rights. If she officially designates you as Diego's legal guardian and contests this petition, that carries weight. The conversation with Maria was one of the hardest things Thomas had ever done. She'd just been released to a transitional care facility, still working on her mobility, still rebuilding her strength. She was finally feeling hopeful about the future. And now Thomas had to tell her that someone was trying to take her son away. They sat in the facility's common room, a depressing space with worn furniture and a TV playing a game show nobody was watching. Thomas showed her the letter, watched the color drain from her face as she read it. Who is this woman? Maria asked, her voice shaking. Why would she do this? I don't know her, Thomas said. But my lawyer thinks she's heard about the situation and sees an opportunity. Some people are like that. Maria's hands were trembling as she held the letter. Can she really take him? Can she take Diego away from both of us? Not if we fight it, Thomas said. But Maria, we need to make some decisions. The temporary guardianship arrangement we have, it's not strong legally. We need to formalize things. Make it official. Maria was quiet for a long time, staring at the letter. Then she said, what would that mean? Making it official? Thomas took a deep breath. It would mean you officially designate me as Diego's legal guardian. Not just temporary, but long-term. It wouldn't take away your parental rights, you'd still be his mother. But legally, I'd be responsible for his care, his education, his well-being, until you're fully recovered and able to take over again. And if this woman challenges it, with you supporting it, with Diego's wishes taken into account, with evidence that he's thriving in the current situation, we'd have a strong case. But Maria, I need you to know this isn't what I want. I'm not trying to take your son from you. I'm just trying to protect him from someone who clearly doesn't have his best interests at heart. Maria looked at him, really looked at him, studying his face for any sign of deception. She'd spent 6 months learning to trust this man, watching him care for her son, accepting his help. But this was different. This was putting it in writing, making it legal, admitting that she couldn't take care of Diego herself. I need to think about this, she said finally. I need to talk to Diego. Of course, Thomas said. Take whatever time you need. But time wasn't something they had much of. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. Jennifer Clayton was pushing hard, and she'd hired an aggressive lawyer who was painting Thomas as an inappropriate guardian and Maria as an unfit mother unable to care for her child. The visits with Diego over the next week were tense. Maria could see her son's anxiety, the way he kept asking if everything was okay, if they were still going to be together. She finally sat him down and explained the situation as simply as she could. "There's a woman who wants you to come live with her," Maria said, holding Diego's hands. "She says she's family, that she can give you a better home." Diego's eyes went wide with fear. "I don't want to live with some stranger. I want to stay with you and Mr. Thomas." "I know, baby, I know," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "But we might have to go to court, and the judge will decide what's best." "What's best is staying where I am," Diego said, his voice rising. "Mama, please, don't let them take me away. I finally have a place where I'm happy. I have friends at school now. I have the ranch. I have Rusty and Daisy. I have Mr. Thomas, and I have you, visiting and getting better. Why would some stranger be better than that?" Maria pulled him close, holding him tight while he cried into her shoulder, and in that moment she knew what she had to do. It didn't matter that it hurt her pride. It didn't matter that it felt like admitting defeat. What mattered was Diego's happiness, his safety, his future. That evening she called Thomas. "I'll sign the papers," she said. "Whatever we need to do to keep him safe, I'll do it." The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal preparations. Thomas's lawyer filed all the necessary paperwork. Maria gave her formal consent for long-term guardianship. They gathered evidence, report cards showing Diego's improved grades, letters from his teacher about his positive behavior, statements from neighbors about Thomas's character, even a letter from Maria's physical therapist talking about how the stable home environment had helped Maria's recovery by reducing her stress. But Jennifer Clayton's lawyer was relentless. They dug into Thomas's past, questioned why a widower would want to take in a random child, implied inappropriate motives. They pointed out that Diego would have siblings in Jennifer's home, a traditional family structure, a mother figure. They made Thomas sound like a lonely old man trying to replace his dead daughter, and Maria like an irresponsible parent who'd put her son in danger. The court date arrived on a gray Thursday morning. Maria wheeled herself into the courthouse, her walker folded in Thomas's truck because she couldn't manage it, and the wheelchair at the same time yet. Diego sat between them wearing his best clothes, looking small and scared. Jennifer Clayton was there with her husband and lawyer. She was younger than Thomas expected, maybe 35, well-dressed, put together. She smiled at Diego like he was already hers. Diego pressed closer to Thomas. The hearing was brutal. Jennifer's lawyer painted a picture of an unstable situation. A single man with no parenting experience, a mother unable to care for her child, a boy being passed between a ranch and a rehabilitation facility with no real home. He questioned Thomas's motives, his background, even brought up the fact that he'd lost his own daughter to suggest he might be emotionally unstable. Thomas's lawyer countered with facts. Diego's improved school performance, his emotional stability, letters from teachers, neighbors, even the pastor from the church Thomas rarely attended, but had grown up in. And then Maria spoke. She wheeled herself to the front of the courtroom, and the judge, a stern woman in her 60s, leaned forward to listen. "Your Honor," Maria began, her voice shaking but determined. "6 months ago I thought I'd lost everything. My health, my ability to work, my home. But worse than all of that, I thought I might lose my son. Not to death, but to a system that would separate us. Put him somewhere I couldn't reach him, where I couldn't watch him grow up." She paused, gathering her strength. "Thomas McAllister saved my life that night. Not just by calling for help, but by making sure my son wasn't alone. And every day since then, he's kept that promise. He's made sure Diego has a home, has stability, has someone who cares about him. Not because he had to. Not because there was anything in it for him. But because he's a good man who saw someone in need and chose to help." Maria's voice grew stronger. "That woman over there, she doesn't know my son. She's never met him, never asked about him, never cared about him until she found out there might be money involved. And yes, I said it." 1 year after the accident, Maria stood in the doorway of a small cottage on Thomas's property, looking at the space that would be her new home. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a living room with big windows that let in the morning sun, but it was hers. And it was on the ranch, close enough to Diego but far enough to give her independence. Thomas had spent 2 months renovating it. The cottage had been his grandmother's place years ago before she passed, and it had sat empty and neglected. But Thomas had fixed the roof, replaced the floors, painted the walls a cheerful yellow that Maria had picked out. He'd installed grab bars in the bathroom for safety, made sure the doorways were wide enough for her walker on bad days. "You didn't have to do all this," Maria said, running her hand along the freshly painted wall. "I wanted to," Thomas said simply. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her explore. Besides, it needed doing anyway. Place was falling apart. Maria turned to look at him. Over the past year, something had shifted between them. Not romance, nothing like that, but a deep, abiding respect, a friendship built on shared purpose and mutual understanding. They'd become partners in raising Diego, making decisions together, supporting each other through hard days. "I'll pay rent," Maria said firmly, "once I start working again." "We'll talk about that later," Thomas said, waving her off. "For now, just focus on getting stronger." Maria had come a long way. She could walk without the walker most days now, though she still needed it when she was tired or in pain. She'd started doing remote data entry work from her computer, building up her savings slowly. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was independence. It was progress. The plan was for Diego to split his time between the cottage and the main house, some nights with his mother, some nights with Thomas, finding a rhythm that worked for all of them. It wasn't conventional, but nothing about their situation had ever been conventional. Diego helped his mother move in that weekend, carrying boxes, deciding where furniture should go, claiming the smaller bedroom as his. He decorated it with posters of planets and animals, a mix of his old life and his new one. "It's like I have 2 homes now," Diego said, flopping onto his bed in the cottage. "Is that weird?" "I don't think so," Maria said, sitting beside him. "I think that's just how our family works." "Our family," Diego repeated, testing the words. "You, me, and Mr. Thomas?" "Yes," Maria said. "That's our family." Over the next few months, they found their rhythm. Diego would spend Monday through Wednesday with Maria in the cottage, helping her with cooking, doing homework at her kitchen table, sleeping in his room there. Thursday through Sunday, he'd stay in the main house with Thomas, working on the ranch, learning more responsibilities, growing stronger and more confident. The arrangement worked better than anyone expected. Maria got to be a full-time mother again, making Diego breakfast, helping with homework, tucking him in at night. But she also got rest when she needed it. Time to work and do her physical therapy and take care of herself. And Diego got the best of both worlds, his mother's love and Thomas's guidance. Thomas, for his part, felt like his house had come back to life. The silence that had haunted him for 5 years was gone, replaced by the sounds of living. Diego's footsteps on the stairs, laughter at the dinner table. Even the arguments about doing chores or finishing vegetables felt precious. The whole ranch seemed happier. The hands who worked for Thomas noticed the change in him. He smiled more, joked around, started hosting the annual 4th of July barbecue again, something he'd stopped doing after his family died. This year, Maria and Diego helped him prepare, and the ranch was full of neighbors and friends and the smell of grilling meat and corn on the cob. Diego turned 10 that fall. They threw him a party on the ranch, the first real birthday party he'd had in years. Kids from his school came, running around the property, riding horses with supervision, playing with Rusty. Maria made a cake, a beautiful 3-layer chocolate cake that she was so proud of, because it was the first complicated thing she'd baked since the accident. Thomas grilled burgers and hot dogs, wearing a ridiculous apron Diego had picked out that said ranch boss. Patricia, the social worker who'd helped them through everything, came with her husband. Linda, Maria's physical therapist, came too. Even Mrs. Chen, Diego's teacher, stopped by. They all gathered around the picnic table as Diego blew out his candles. Maria stood on one side of him, Thomas on the other. And looking at the 3 of them together, you could see it. Not a perfect family, not a traditional family, but a family nonetheless. After the party, after all the guests had left and the sun was setting, the 3 of them sat on the porch of the main house. Diego was between them, tired and happy, still wearing his birthday crown that one of his friends had made. "Best birthday ever," Diego said, yawning. "Yeah?" Thomas asked, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, because everyone I love was here." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. A year ago, she'd been in a hospital bed, broken and terrified, convinced she'd lost everything. And now here she was sitting on a porch with her healthy, happy son and the man who'd saved both of them, in more ways than one. "Mr. Thomas," Diego said sleepily, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, kid. Why did you stop that night?" "In the rain. Most people would have just driven past." Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Then he said, "I stopped because 5 years ago someone stopped for my family. They called 911, stayed with my wife and daughter until help arrived. They couldn't save them, but they tried. They cared. And I always wondered what kind of person does that. Stops for strangers when they could just keep driving. And then I saw you and your mama that night and I realized that person is the kind of person I want to be." Diego nodded slowly, processing this. "I'm glad you stopped. Me too, son. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars started to appear. Rusty slept at their feet. Somewhere in the distance, a cow called out. The night was warm and full of crickets and the smell of grass. "I've been thinking," Maria said carefully, "about what happens next. Long term." Both Thomas and Diego looked at her. "I'm getting stronger every day," Maria continued. "I'm working now, saving money. Eventually I'll be able to support Diego on my own again. Get us our own place, maybe in town. That was always the plan, right? For this to be temporary?" Diego's face fell. "Mama, no. Why would we leave?" "Not leave the ranch," Maria clarified. "I'm not talking about leaving. I like my cottage. I like being here. But Thomas, this was supposed to be temporary. You've already done so much for us, more than anyone could ever expect. At some point you deserve to have your life back." Thomas looked at her steadily. "What if this is my life now? What if I don't want it to go back to how it was before? But we can't just stay here forever," Maria said. "Taking advantage of your generosity." "You're not taking advantage," Thomas said firmly. "You're paying rent now. You're helping around the property, and more than that, your family, both of you. This isn't charity anymore, Maria. This is just how we live." "But people will talk," Maria said. "They already do. About the arrangement, about how it looks, about—" "I don't care what people say," Thomas interrupted. "Let them talk. The people who matter, the people who actually know us, they understand. And the people who don't understand, well, their opinions don't matter." Diego looked between them, anxiety written all over his face. "Are we really a family? For real, not just temporary?" Maria and Thomas looked at each other. A whole conversation passed between them in that look. An understanding. An agreement. A choice being made. "Yes," Maria said finally. "We're really a family. For real," Thomas added. "For as long as you both want to be here." Diego's face broke into a huge smile. Then he did something neither of them expected. He stood up and hugged Thomas first, tight and fierce. Then he turned and hugged Maria the same way. "I love you both," he said, his voice muffled against his mother's shoulder. "My two homes. My whole family." And that was it. That was the moment everything became official. Not in a legal sense, but in a way that mattered more. They weren't Thomas the guardian and Maria the mother and Diego the child in between anymore. They were just them. A family that didn't fit any traditional mold but worked perfectly for who they were. Life went on. Diego grew. He started middle school, joined the 4-H club, won a blue ribbon for raising a calf. Maria kept getting stronger, eventually trading her walker for just a cane on bad days. She got promoted at her data entry job, started taking online classes to get better certifications, dreaming of a career, not just a job. Thomas taught Diego everything he knew about ranching. How to mend fences, how to spot a sick cow, how to read the sky for weather. He also taught him other things. How to be honest even when it's hard. How to keep your word. How to show up for people who need you. And Maria taught Diego too, about his heritage, about resilience, about the importance of education and hard work. She made sure he never forgot where he came from, who his people were, what sacrifices had been made for him to be here. Together, the three of them created something new. Not replacing what they'd lost, but building something different, something that acknowledged the pain and the tragedy that brought them together, but also celebrated the joy and love they'd found in the aftermath.